Hello, viewers. This is the Prophet Vlog with Marcel Cicero. Today I'll be talking about, for the next few videos, I'll be talking about Obadiah and about this book, book, the shortest book within the Old Testament. So basically, we see Edom a few times in the Old Testament. One time being in Amos, and another time being in Isaiah. And of course, it is the subject of this book, Obadiah. And every time this place, Edom, comes up, it seems like it's always going to be destroyed. So what did Edom do? Why is there this relationship between prophets and Edomites that seems so full of tension? And why are the prophets seemingly to speak that God hates Edom and that they will be ultimately punished by being totally destroyed? So let's jump into history of Edom and kind of what sets up this relationship between Jerusalem, its prophets, and Edom. So right away, we have this anger directed at Edom. Just to give a little background, Edom is a country east of Judah and to the south of the Dead Sea. They are people that are very close to Judah, not only geographically, but within their ancestry. They all come from the same people from northeastern Israel. So when we talk about the connection between these two groups of people, they are entwined both by land and by blood. Let's dive into the text now. So it says, the vision of Obadiah. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom. This can be two things. It can be blessings or it can be destruction. We have heard a message from the Lord, and a herald has been sent among the nations. Rise up, so we may go to war against it. So not blessings. In fact, very much so destruction. What we see is that Edom has too much pride. God has made a judgment about Edom. Thus says the Lord God concerning Edom, we have a message from the Lord, and a herald has been sent up among the nations. Rise up so we may go to war against it. We're talking about Edom here. And Edom is basically being prophesied to be destroyed. That nations are going to rise up specifically against Edom because Yahweh wants to destroy it. The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who dwell in mountain crevices in your lofty home, who say in your heart, who will bring me down to earth? Though you soar like the eagle, your nest is set among the stars. From there I will bring you down, oracle of the Lord. What Edom is being destroyed for is that they have too much pride, that they don't give to God their military prowess or how much they've been flourishing, is that God now comes in, steps in to humble them, using different nations, divine violence, basically to, again, level, because for whatever reason, Edom is not coming back to God. Just as we see many times in Israel, Edom is doing the exact same thing, exploiting God's blessings and having too much pride, thus ensuring that they will now be destroyed and completely leveled into nothing, into non-existence. In verses 8 through 14, we have Edom's betrayal of Judah. Now, this is where we really get into the understanding, into the context of why Edom and Jerusalem have this tension, have this beef, and maybe the right word is hostility and hate. On that day, oracle of the Lord, will I not make the wise disappear from Edom? This is saying something very interesting about Edom. In Job, we see that Job's consolers are from Edom. Edom has this reputation as being wise, being very intellectual. Teman, your warriors will be terror-stricken, so that everyone on Mount Esau will be cut down because of violence to your brother Jacob. Now we see this connection between Esau and Jacob. Esau being the older brother of Jacob, who was basically, because Jacob use treachery in order to gain favor with Isaac and basically get a better inheritance from Esau. Esau is commonly associated with Edom, while Jacob is, of course, associated with Israel and Jerusalem. So we see that everyone on Mount Esau will be cut down because of violence to your brother Jacob. So immediately we see this brotherhood connection between Israel and Edom. And the reason why God is so mad is that Edom, as a brother, did nothing to stop the Babylonian exile. This is a problem because Edom counts as a Semitic people. Their ancestors were from the same place. Edom's ancestors immigrated from northeast Israel, and they would be of the same people, of the same bloodline as those in Jerusalem. But this tension is actually deeper than what we see between what's going on right now within the story of Obadiah. The tension actually starts before this, during the reign of David. Now, if you're part of Jerusalem, if you're part of Israel, then you will remember that David was a great king, the greatest king, that he brought economic wealth, military power to Judah and to these people in the Promised Land. But what we don't remember is that the people in Edom are basically enslaved by David to work in the copper mines and help grow Judah. So we can kind of sympathize with Edom here, because I couldn't imagine my ancestors being taken as slaves by another nation and then not wanting some part of me to want the failure of Jerusalem, of Judah, of this great nation that took advantage of my ancestors. But this part of the history concerning Edom is apparently not in Obadiah's vision. As he says, "On the day you stood by, the day strangers carried off his possessions, and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were like one of them." So now we have the most egregious insult to Edom. The most egregious sin is that Edom did not act like a brother. Instead, they acted like a Babylonian, which is way worse, because here you have two brother states, and one of them has not only sided with the enemy, they are being considered as the enemy is. Now we have verse 12. "Do not gloat over the day of your brother, the day of his disaster. Do not exult over the people of Judah on the day of their ruin. Do not speak haughtily on the day of distress." So now we have more pride, more hate, and more disregard for the common faith that these two nations and the same people have. The book goes on by saying, "Do not enter the gate of my people on the day of their calamity. Do not gloat, especially you, over his misfortune on the day of his calamity. Do not lay hands upon his possessions on the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut down his survivors, and do not hand over his fugitives on the day of his distress." Now we see what earlier verses are talking about when they make direct comparisons to Babylonians. Because now not only did some Edomites stand by and watch, but now they are participating in what is happening by the Babylonians to those of Jerusalem. We actually read that Edomites are standing on the borders and cutting those trying to escape down in order to get back. This is a very different description and coming prophecy of destruction regarding a place. Usually, at least within Amos, we see there's a long list of different cities. In Isaiah, there's a general idea of destruction. Then there's the specific region that's going to be destroyed, being named Edom. But this is a book entirely devoted to Edom. And it sounds very vindictive. Let's talk about the specific instances where Edom and Judah were pitted against each other. Tensions evident between Jacob and Esau in the story of their birth continued and accelerated according to the record of their relationship preserved in the Old Testament. Edom denied Israel's request for permission to pass through Edomite territory on their way from Egypt to Canaan, Numbers chapter 20, 14 through 21. Saul fought against Edom, 1 Samuel 14:47, and King David conquered it, 2 Samuel 8, 13 to 14. Hadad, however, a young member of the Edomite royal family, escaped, fled to Egypt, and returned after David's death to plague Solomon. Seems petty, but it's all part of this great story between Edom and Israel. That has covered the subject of Edom so far of this video. The next video will be concerning the rest of Obadiah, but I wanted to give this background. But part of this vlog will not only be concerning Obadiah, but it'll truly be a vlog for young ministers such as myself and who are trying to kind of figure out their own theology, but also form the theology of those they minister. That being said, we can all be Edom, and we can definitely all be Judah. We can all be Judah in the sense that sometimes we'll be defeated, and we'll look around and we will see those who not only maybe saw our defeat coming and didn't tell us, but those who may have freely participated in our defeat. But on the other hand, we can also very much be Edom in the sense that we can see one of our ministers, maybe those who are ministering to, who are on the road to a lackluster situation or event, and instead of helping or being a brother or sister, we stand by and we do nothing, or we aid in a sense. We enable. We don't do what we're supposed to do. We don't say what we're supposed to say. And instead, we stand by and watch as one of our siblings in Christ has to undergo much struggle that could have otherwise been preventable. Our job as ministers is to look at both Edom and Israel and recognize ourselves within those nations, those states, those people, and see that we have brothers and sisters around us who may need help and have to provide that help. But also, we need to be able to look at ourselves and name our sins and see where we've failed as siblings in Christ. That wraps up our prophet vlog for today. Go out and be good ministers, and thank you for viewing. We'll get back to you for our next video next time. Good night. This is the prophet vlog once again with Marcel Lucero, and our continuing subject in this series will be again about Obadiah. Last video was more about Edom and about Edom's decrees. This section is going to be more about the prophet Obadiah, or the people who wrote under the name of prophet Obadiah, and we're going to get really into the exegetical nature of the text, as well as getting into the debate between commentaries and different scholars, and so this will be a much more informational section about the actual book than about historical context of Edom. So thank you for being here, whether it's just one of you or many. Let's begin with the name of the book, chapter book. It's called Obadiah. What Obadiah means in Hebrew actually means servant of God, and this term actually is used throughout the Bible, throughout the Old Testament, to state just that. So already we don't get, even though we have a servant of God title, this name means a lot more once we go into the text and different arguments. Because what quickly arises is that many scholars don't agree that this is one literary unit. Instead, even though this book is a very short chapter of 21 verses, many scholars believe that it's actually Three literary units that are. Let's start with the name Obadiah. Obadiah in Hebrew actually means servant of God. So already we have the opening for debate on whether this book was just one person or it was people writing under the name of Obadiah or this more general term of servant of God. So what has been greatly debated throughout the sections is we have mainly two sections, 2 to 3 sections, depending on what scholar you're reading. But it's the understanding that 1 through 14, verses 1 through 14, and 15b are from one perspective, and 15a and 16 through 21 are of a different perspective. The writers of Obadiah are post-exilic, and they are speaking to Judah. They're speaking to survivors of the exile. So we're in post-exilic period, and now we have these people going back to Israel. And with them, they are bringing the wrath and anger of their Lord against Edom, their neighbor to the east. The structure of verses 1 through 9 are very similar to Jeremiah in the sense that there's a call to battle, but it seems less imminent. There's in Jeremiah we have speech about gathering on the battlefield and moving forward. That's not in Obadiah. But the verses 1 through 9 and the structure, they're all very similar. Also, what we hear in the first 9 verses of Obadiah is all about how Edom has been very prideful and has been, they exist on their perch and they're in the nest and Yahweh is going to rip them down. This makes no mention of the later sins that Edom commits later, actually against Israel. These first 9 verses sound like verses that are more directed toward Yahweh in their ignorance or their pushing away of Yahweh, not accepting blessings, not offering sacrifice, not praising, not acknowledging Yahweh. So within the first 9 verses, we have no talk about how Edom has intentionally destroyed their brother Jacob, but instead the first 9 verses are more about offense to Yahweh. What this points to is that verses 1 through 9 probably predate destruction of Jerusalem in 586. So these verses are more concerned with theological developments of Edom being too wise, Edom not praising Yahweh enough. So these are what prophets are saying right now. Those are verses 1 through 9. This doesn't mean that God isn't going to cut down every soldier in Mount Esau. It just means that the sins are different. What we now have in verses 10 through 14 and 15b is post-destruction. Oracles that are talking about Jerusalem being destroyed, and now we have an understanding of what Edom has done. And this is where Edom's sins are enumerated within the Bible. The third section of Obadiah would point to a later period. So we have verses 15a and 16 through 21 that are aimed more at restoration of Judah. So now we've gotten past the initial hate of Edom, verses 1 through 9, then 10 through 14 and 15b regarding the actual sins and the day of reckoning, or day of the Lord as it's called within the chapter. And finally we have verses 15a and 16 through 21 being that now we have moved on after that, and now we are talking about eradicating the different peoples that are now inhabit the land of Judah, and now we have restoration of Judah in the wake of Edom's destruction. So let's break down the first 9 verses of the book of Obadiah. Starting off the book, the first verse says, the vision of Obadiah. In Hebrew, the word vision is hazon, and this would mean that Obadiah is not speaking for himself, but he is actually speaking the words of the Lord. So we have a direct proclamation from God through Obadiah, or the different writers of Obadiah. Within the first verse, we read, "We've heard a message from the Lord, and a herald has been sent among the nations. Rise up so we may go to war against it." Already we have the prophet kind of calling to his congregation, calling as a group, saying we and not I, which is a shift from Jeremiah 49. Instead it says, "We have heard a message from the Lord, and a herald has been sent among the nations. Rise up so we may go to war against it." This is a call to divine violence, as God is calling other Gentile nations and Judah alike to go and destroy Edom. In verse 2, we see a shift to a second-person perspective addressing Edom, in that Obadiah writes, "Now I make you least among the nations, you are utterly contemptible." So now we have a shift in perspective. Now we are speaking to Edom. "The pride of your heart has deceived you, you who dwell in mountain crevices in your lofty home." Here, this is Obadiah touching on not only the physical location of Edom, but also the amount of pride that Edom has. So not only do they reside in the mountains, but they believe that they are higher than anyone can touch, and that they are also higher than Yahweh's graces. Obadiah then says, "Who say in your heart, who will bring me down to the earth? Though you soar like the eagle, and your nest is set among the stars, from where I will bring you down, oracle of the Lord." In verses 5 and 6 we read, "If thieves came to you, robbers by night, how would you have been destroyed? Would they not steal merely till they had enough? If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave some gleanings? How Esau has been searched out, his treasures hunted down." Basically, within these two verses is saying that thieves, grape pickers, people who steal, would leave more than what will be left of Edom. God is stating that he is going to completely level and destroy Edom. We even see that the prophet is trying to communicate specifically with his audience, these people of Judah. By in the middle of verse 5, he says, "If thieves came to you, robbers by night, how you have been destroyed." He can't wait. He cannot wait to detail the destruction of Edom. This is an exclamation right within the middle of the verse 5. He continues, "Would they not steal merely till they had enough?" So it's like in the middle of the verse, there's an exclamation, there's this excitement, there's this, it's just like you have this prophet who's just raring to go, just ready to go and talk about the destruction of Edom. In verse 7, we read, "To the border they have driven you, all your allies. Your partners have deceived you, they have overpowered you. Those who eat your bread will replace you with foreigners who have no understanding." The first part of verse 7 is basically talking about how allies and people who Edom considers friends will basically lure them down from their mountainous perch. They'll lure them down, and then they will destroy them. After this, "Your partners who have deceived you and they have overpowered you." Again, this is the prophet describing what will happen to Edom because of their pride, because of their self-confidence. Next, you have, "Those who eat your bread will replace you with foreigners who have no understanding." This verse is very important because it's pointing directly at covenant meals, in which two nations would share a meal, a peace meal, to forge their bond and basically state that they're allies. So, with that being said, the prophet is saying that those who eat your bread will replace you with foreigners who have no understanding, who have no recollection, who have no memory of what happened to you. So not only will you be destroyed, but your history will be destroyed, and it will be at the hands of your allies. What is also very interesting about this word understanding in the last part of verse 7, who have no understanding, is that Edom is known for their wisdom. They're cited in Job, they're cited in Jeremiah as having this knowledge and this wisdom. And understanding being a synonym for the word wisdom is kind of like an extra jab used by the prophet to say that those who will replace you will have no wisdom, That even though you think that you're so great, that you're so intelligent, that you're so wise, that you're so high, those who reject Yahweh's blessings or don't attribute those blessings to Yahweh will be replaced with people who maybe are far less wise, but at least more faithful to Yahweh. The same sentiment is drawn out in verse 8 when he says, "On that day, oracle of the Lord will I not make the wise disappear from Edom and understanding from Mount Esau." So again, we have an understanding that Edom is full of wise people and God doesn't care. So he's going to destroy Edom and all the people who reside in Edom. In verse 9, we have the end of the first understanding of what would be the first oracle. And it says, Taman, which is a synonym or another name for Edom, your warriors will be terror-stricken, so that everyone on Mount Esau will be cut down. So again, we still have no explanation of the physical things that Edom has done against Judah, but instead these are all charges of offense to Yahweh. Now we move into the new section of verses 10 through 14 and 15b. Because of your violence to your brother Jacob, disgrace will cover you. You will be done away with forever. The word violence in verse 10 most likely point back to history of a hostility between Edom toward Judah, of ancestors against ancestors. Now this is only an introduction into what will be the real crux of what Obadiah is talking about in Edom's betrayal of Judah. On verse 11, we have the beginnings of the sins, the specific sins of Edom against Judah. On the day you stood by, the day strangers carried off his possessions and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots for Jerusalem, you too were like one of them. I talked about this in the last video, but now we have the real statement that Edom is just as the enemies are. So now not only do we have the violence of Jacob against your brother, but now it is acting as if you are not brothers at all. What would be understood in the context of those listening to this would be the word day. On the day you stood by. That is specific reference to the day that Jerusalem fell, that the Babylonians came in. So the listeners of this prophecy would be remembering that the day that they were forced from their land, that their ancestors were forced from their land. This would no doubt be within every mind of those who are in exile. This is the history of their people and the reason why they're in the physical location that they're in. What we have in verses 12 through 14 is basically the prophet is going to be really saying what Edom did. So what we have is, do not gloat over the day of your brother, the day of his disaster. Do not exult over the people of Judah on the day of their ruin. Do not speak haughtily on the day of distress. Do not enter the gate of my people on the day of their calamity. Do not gloat, especially you, over his misfortune on the day of his calamity. Do not lay hands upon his possessions on the day of his calamity. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut down his survivors. Do not hand over his fugitives on the day of his distress. So we have 8 prohibitions that are aimed at Edom. The scholar J. Lilly described the impact of Obadiah's repeated language pattern may have had on the listeners. The cadence is that of an incessant beat of a drummer leading troops into battle. So basically it's this understanding that those who are listening to Obadiah speak these words are now getting very excited to hear the treachery that Edom has committed against them. We have these list of sins that are obviously wrong. Do not hand over his fugitives on the day of distress. Do not enslave my people. Do not stand at the crossroads to cut down his survivors. Do not lay hands upon his possessions on the day of his calamity. What's obvious about these 3 verses, 12 through 14, is that they're still playing on Edom's supposed superiority. That Edom is still looking down. Edom still feels better than the people of Jerusalem, of Judah. There's an understanding that if you do this against another people, it is a bad thing. But if you're rooting for your brother's destruction and stealing from him and cutting down his survivors and selling his people in slavery, then there's two offenses going on. And then add on that these are God's chosen people, and Edom finds themselves in the middle of a poop storm. Because not only did they gloat off of Jerusalem's destruction, but they stole and they profited and murdered. So those are four sins that are enumerated within those three verses. And what we see is that there's going to be some divine punishment occurring as a result of these actions. Finally, in the concluding statement of that section, we would see verse 15b, "As you have done, so will it be done to you. Your conduct will come back upon your own head." Meaning that everything that they've done to Judah thus far as killing them, all the prohibitions we talked about, casting lots from them, gloating, stealing, and selling into slavery, all this will now happen to Edom, and it will fall upon them just as they made it fall upon Judah. So now we have the last section and the last perspective detailing in Obadiah. In verse 15a, it says, "Near is the day of the Lord against all nations." Now that would be understood to the context of those in Judah and post-exilic Judah. We would be seeing that the day of the Lord is detailed in Amos as being a destruction. And it says, "Near is the day of the Lord against all the nations." In verse 16, we see that Yahweh is making a proclamation that all nations will have to suffer the same fate that Judah has up to this point if they don't do what they're supposed to, just as Edom didn't do what they were supposed to. But in verse 17, there's a shift, as it says, "But on Mount Zion there will be some who escape, the mountain will be holy." Meaning that these people who have been loyal to Yahweh, who will see his affection, will see his love. And the next part of 17 says, "And the house of Jacob will take possession of those who dispossess them." Meaning that Judah will be restored, and the people who are inhabiting those lands will then be taken back by Judah and will be under Judah's rule. Many scholars talk about Obadiah being somewhat vindictive and nationalistic, and this is the verse that they would be pointing to. "And the house of Jacob will take possession of those who dispossess them. The house of Jacob will be a fire, and the house of Joseph a flame, and the house of Esau stubble." So now we have a discussion of three kingdoms. First being Jacob, which is obviously that of Judah, pointing back to its roots as Jacob being the tribal father. The next will be the house of Joseph, a flame, being that Joseph would be the father of the northern kingdom. So now we're talking about Israel. So now we have both the mention of the southern kingdom as well as the northern kingdom. And finally, the house of Esau, stubble. So once again, we have this nationalistic understanding that not only is Judah coming back, but there's a hope that the northern kingdom and southern kingdom will be able to be reestablished and will become a union. The second half of verse 18 reads, "They will set it ablaze and devour it. None will survive of the house of Esau, for the Lord has spoken." I feel like that's self-explanatory. In the final two verses of Obadiah, three verses, "They will take possession of the Negeb, Mount Esau, Shephelah, and Philistia, possess the countryside of Ephraim, the countryside of Samaria, Benjamin, and Gilead. The exiles of this Israelite army will possess the Canaanite land as far as Zarephath, and the exiles of Jerusalem who are in Shepharad will possess the cities of the Negeb, and deliverers will ascend Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingship shall be the Lord's." Now this is basically the Lord saying what the people of Israel will now basically inherit. But the shift that happens in 21 is most important. "And deliverers will ascend Mount Zion to rule Mount Esau, and the kingship shall be the Lord's." So the Lord is making it very clear that this will not return to the old guard of how to do things. It will not look exactly as Edom looked. Instead, there will be a change, and it says, "The kingship shall be the Lord's," which is very different. meaning that Yahweh will then again have superiority, which Edom never gave the Lord. So this is the shift in 21. Finally, we've reached the end of our 21 verses, and we can see that they come from three distinct perspectives. One being that Edom has sinned against Yahweh, has not been thankful, and has not been truly thankful to God in what they have. Two is that they have sinned against their brother Judah by gloating his defeat and profiting off of his destruction. And third, we see the third perspective being that we have an image of hope for Judah. Still with the demise of Edom, but there's a hope and a true promise of restoration of Judah. And not only restoration, but again, as we follow with salvation history, we have both the restoration of the kingdom of Judah, but also that while Judah may exist, it is God who is reigning. And just to wrap up this vlog, as I do with every section, I just kind of wanted to touch on this last point, that as ministers we can identify with Judah in the sense of that we hope that we can get to a place of influence. As we are humans, that we have this this social element to us, that we want the social worth, we want to be needed, we want to have some kind of power or influence. But with that, we can become like Edom, where we think that we're too wise, we're too powerful, and that we don't really give thanks to who gave us what we have, gave us our gifts and our blessings. So in this sense, when we talk about Judah being restored, not only as a nation, but in faith, this is what we always have to remember, that though we may reach these high places where maybe we start out as a teacher of a middle school, Catholic middle school, and we move to being, I don't know, like a director of religious education, or a director of youth formation for a diocese or for a really large parish. We can look to see ourselves as the one who has pushed us so far forward, that we have become so great. We've acquired all this wisdom, and now we don't have to thank God. So in a sense, we must see that Yahweh, or God, Adonai, our Lord, is what blesses us with this ability to lead, blesses us with this ability to succeed, and know that we can be Edom, and that all of it can be taken away from us. So with that, just reflect on that as I'm reflecting on it, and how we can use Obadiah and these different writings of the Old Testament to really apply to what we're doing within our own ministry. The next and final section of this vlog on Obadiah will be the theological and ethical principles behind Obadiah. And so we'll take care of that in the next section. All right, see you soon. Welcome to the last installation of my prophet vlog about Obadiah. My name is Marcel Lucero, and this will be our last video, kind of wrapping up what Obadiah's book was about. The last two videos, we kind of went over Edom. We also went over more exegetical information, verse by verse, what scholars believe these verses actually meant, who they were written by. So really, this last video will be covering like a theological and ethical analysis, as well as probably reaction of what people were listening to and what they were hoping for. So this is what this video is about. We see very clearly that the first 19 verses can be seen as something to whip up a crowd, to really whip up a congregation, to be kind of this inspirational speech from a prophet, but also just a proclamation that justice will be done. At the end of the chapter, at the end of the book, in verses 19 through 21, though, there is something that is most important to the people who are listening. While it is important that Edom is able to eat their dessert. It's also very important to the people of Judah that something is done right by them. Your whole plan can't be revenge. There has to be something at the end that allows one to regain a fullness, gain a true restoration. And we see that in verses 19 through 21, in that Judah will be restored. So, understanding that, what this book could mean to the people hearing it is again, just as many books are in the Old Testament, is constantly is fulfilling a need for people to have hope, to hear that God still loves them, that God will do right by them. This is 19 through 21, and this is the best way of understanding 19 through 21. And the people hearing, while they're getting whipped up in its vindictive nature of hearing this prophecy, at the same time, they will also hear that they will be restored and that Yahweh will be again their ruler, will be their king, and that he will guide them and serve them. Moving into the ethical lessons that can be learned in Obadiah, we hear in verses 1 through 9 that pride is a perennial problem. And to people who are reading this after it's already been introduced into the canon, this book, the first 9 verses, will not be solely concerned about other people not believing in God, or this is a very personal message to the listener in hearing that pride separates one's blessings from God, and that's ultimately an insult and offense to God. The second lesson we learn is that God is a ruler of all nations, and that he is to be respected as such. This is a sin committed by Edom, but also a sin committed by Israel and Judah, in the sense that they have idolatry in their past, and they're also confronting that in the discussion of Edom. So when we speak of God as ruler of all nations, we see that at the end of the chapter as well, is that to say that Judah was not allowing Yahweh to be their leader, and that with Judah being restored, they have an opportunity to respect Yahweh as their ruler, as their leader, and as their king. The third thing that we learn as listeners is that God is a God of justice, that he is a just God, that and this is important. It's important for those who are hearing this, that if there's been wrong done to them, if there have been vindictive acts against them, that God is just and God does not ignore those offenses. So this is important theologically and ethically, that we see that God does not just allow evil to be done to anyone, that there is justice and God will deliver that justice. The fourth thing that we learn is that sometimes hope for justice can turn into a real hunger for revenge. And we see this in that Edom feels like it's been wronged by Jerusalem and by Judah from past hostility and past acts. So now Judah, when Judah is being ransacked, we now see Edom rejoicing in that. And in verse 11, Obadiah accused Edom of becoming like one of them, i.e., like the Babylonians. But the very fact that Obadiah is now rejoicing and whipping the crowd up, whipping his congregation up in hope for complete annihilation and destruction of Edom, points to Judah becoming just like Edom, i.e., just like Babylon. So this is really a lesson of constant reflection, that there's a reflection of Judah looking at Edom, but Edom is also looking at Judah. And it's very easy for the victim to become the oppressor and the oppressor to become the victim. And the last thing that we learn within Obadiah, which is always a theme, is that God brings hope to a broken people. God does not abandon these people. God looks after them and sees them and hears their lamentations, hears their cries. And this is really what this book is about. That there have been wrongs done, and the people of Judah are lamenting over their sadness, over their exile, and now Obadiah and these prophets are delivering a message of newness, of hope, and that gives the people from Judah exactly what they need. It gives them the fire and the belief in Yahweh that Yahweh will deliver them. Doing this prophet vlog on Obadiah has taught me a lot. For being such a short book, chapter thing, in 21 verses, it covers a lot of information. It covers a lot of theology. It covers a lot of personal struggle that's here, along as with you could say nationalistic struggle. But I learned that humility is something that needs to be valued, and that God smiles on humility, and God does not smile on haughtiness or gloating or drooling over your brother's destruction. Revenge, God does not smile on. So, as ministers going forward, I just have in this mind Yahweh, a very personal God who's looking down on his people, hoping that they will do right, hoping that they will do the right thing, and that knowing that he is just, but to also he wants to view his people as being good. No doubt God wanted this for Edom, and some people in Edom didn't do that. And no doubt God wants the same for Judah. And we also know that Judah hasn't always been that as well. So I believe that our job as ministers and as people is to do each act for the good of our neighbor, but also to not take that as part of our own personal virtue, in that we can then praise ourselves. Because really, what we do this for is sincerely to feel God smile upon us, to make God smile. And to know that when we don't do what we're supposed to do, that we don't make God smile. I want to leave you with that thought. Thank you for viewing this, and I pray that you find success in everything that you do, and that you continue to make God smile.